I want to ask you to remember something. Have you ever had a moment, could have been in therapy, could have been a conversation with someone you trust, could have been alone, where something you'd understood for years suddenly felt different, where the pattern you'd been circling and analyzing and explaining to yourself and everyone else suddenly wasn't just something you knew about anymore. Something actually shifted. Some ground moved under you. And when you came back to that same trigger or situation later, it didn't grab you the same way. Not, I forgot about it. Not, I got better at coping with it. Not, I distracted myself. But something in the underlying pattern was different, like it had been rewritten. If you've had a moment like that, you already know what this episode is about. Because that experience, the one that felt qualitatively different from all the other times you had to change something, has a name and a mechanism. And it's one of the most important pieces of neuroscience of the last 25 years. Today is Pillar 4 of the MetaTherapy Framework, and it might be the most hopeful piece of the whole series. Because it's the piece where we stop describing why change is hard and start describing how change actually happens at the level of the brain. It is called memory reconsolidation. And once you understand it, everything the last 3 episodes have been circling around clicks into place. For most of the 20th century, psychology and neuroscience agreed on one thing about memory. Once a memory is stored, it's permanent. The idea was that memories worked like files in a cabinet. Once the file was saved, that was it. You could add new files nearby, new learning, new experiences that competed with the old, but you couldn't touch the original. The old memory was, at the level of the brain, sealed. And this was the whole theoretical basis of every mainstream evidence-based therapy for decades. If the old learning is permanent, then all we can do is build new learning alongside it, strong enough to compete. That's what exposure therapy is doing, for instance. That's what CBT is doing. That's what most of the manualized protocols are trying to accomplish. And it works. Sort of. And that's the frustrating part. It works enough to help millions of people, and it doesn't work enough that the field has been quietly puzzled for decades about why some clients get so far and then plateau, why the old patterns come back under stress, why 5 years of therapy can produce impressive self-understanding that still crumbles the moment the actual trigger shows up. And there's a reason for that. And the reason changed everything. In the year 2000, a neuroscientist named Karim Nader worked in Joseph LeDoux's lab at NYU, conducting an experiment that overturned 100 years of thinking about memory. He conditioned rats to fear a tone. Then he played the tone, reactivating the memory. And immediately after, he blocked protein synthesis in the amygdala. The fear memory was effectively erased. Same treatment without reactivation, memory intact. Same treatment 6 hours after reactivation, memory intact. The implication of that finding took decades to fully sink in, and it goes something like this. Memories are not permanent. When you retrieve one, it becomes briefly editable. And in that editable window, that little window between remembering and restoring, the memory can actually be updated. Every time you remember something, you are not opening a fixed file. You're opening a file that will get rewritten by the act of remembering, which means old emotional learning that felt like it was carved into stone, it isn't. It's carved in something more like clay, a clay that, it turns out, can be reshaped. This didn't just tweak our understanding of memory, it reorganized what we thought was possible in therapy. Because in the old learning, if it's retrievable, and if once retrieved, it's briefly rewritable, then the work of therapy isn't just building new patterns to compete with the old. The old pattern itself is being revised. Okay, so if memories can be updated, how? What has to happen? And this is where the neuroscience gets very practical, because in the 25 years since Nader's original study, researchers have converged on three things that need to happen in sequence for the reconstruction window to actually open and produce an update rather than a temporary flicker. The clearest formulation of these three requirements comes from a clinician researcher named Bruce Ecker, who has spent the last 30 years translating this science into a therapeutic method. And the formulation is simple enough to memorize. One is reactivation. The old learning must be brought back into present experience, not just remembered, but felt, including the bodily and emotional charge that came with it originally. Two, a mismatch. That reactivated memory must encounter something that genuinely violates what it expected. Prediction error, a new experience the old learning was not braced for. Three, repetition. The new learning must be encountered multiple times within the window, and the window is roughly 10 minutes to 6 hours for the update to consolidate into the permanent memory trace. So let's go through these more carefully. Requirement 1, reactivation. So this is where the insight alone approaches often fall short, and where the whole first three pillars of the framework come into play. You can talk about an old pattern for years without actually reactivating it in the technical sense. You can describe your inner critic in beautiful psychological language while it stays completely dormant. You can explain your attachment style over dinner. That, unfortunately, is not reactivation. Reactivation means the old thing is present. You can feel it in your body. You can feel the emotional charge. You're not describing it from 10 feet away. This is one reason the somatic pillar matters so much. The body is often the fastest access to reactivation. The tightness in your chest, the pit in your stomach, the flush of shame. These are the doorways to the actual memory trace. Requirement number 2, the mismatch. This is the trigger, and it's the piece that took researchers the longest to figure out. For a long time, people assumed that just remembering a memory was enough to make it editable. Turns out, not so much. If retrieval alone opened the window, you'd be rewriting your memories every time you thought about them, which would be catastrophic, actually. So the brain has a mechanism to prevent that. Retrieval only destabilizes a memory when something genuinely doesn't match, when what the nervous system predicted would happen and what actually happened diverge. So, what's the mechanism here? The technical term is prediction error. Your brain runs on prediction. It's constantly generating a forecast of what's about to happen. When reality contradicts the forecast, your brain has to update. That update, that little jolt of wait, that's not what I expected, is the signal that opens the reconsolidation window. This is why some therapy moments produce lasting change and some don't. It's not because the therapist was better or worse. It's because a real mismatch happened. Insight without mismatch is not update. You can understand your pattern perfectly and never rewrite it because understanding is not a prediction error. The old learning saw understanding coming from a mile away. What updates the learning is when your nervous system braces for the old outcome and something else happens. And then requirement number 3 is the repetition. The window is real, but it's not infinite. Once the memory has been destabilized, you have a limited period, roughly 10 minutes to 6 hours, based on research, for new learning to consolidate into the trace before it locks back down again. And lasting updates typically need repetition. Not the endless drill of exposure therapy, but a few solid encounters close in time that give the nervous system the message this contradiction wasn't a fluke. So now I want you to try something with me. And this is a little different from what we've done in previous weeks. We're not going to run a technique on you. Reconsolidation is not a DIY kind of thing. It's real clinical territory. What we're going to do instead is help you identify a moment you've likely already had so you know what one feels like from the inside. Think back to a time when something in you actually shifted, not just understood something new, but felt different afterward in a way that sort of stuck. Maybe it was a conversation with a friend where you had been rehearsing your explanation for the 100th time, and this time, for some reason, they said something back you weren't expecting, and it landed differently. Maybe it was a moment in therapy where you'd been walking around a pattern like it was an art exhibition, describing every angle, and then the therapist did or said one small thing you hadn't seen coming. And then something in the pattern loosened. Maybe it was a moment of grief where you've been white knuckling it for months, and someone showed up in a way you'd stopped believing was possible, and you cried. You actually cried, and something in you changed. Maybe it was a moment with a child or a partner or a stranger where you saw yourself doing the old thing, and instead of the usual shame spiral, something inside you quietly said, "Oh, I don't have to do that." And it was true. If any of that landed, if you're thinking of a moment right now, I want you to notice what those moments had in common. The old thing was there. That's reactivation. You were in it, feeling it, not describing it from far away. Something happened that you weren't braced for. That's mismatch. Reality did something the old pattern hadn't predicted. And whatever it was allowed to actually land. and land again, and maybe again. That's the repetition. The nervous system got the message that this wasn't a fluke. Those three things happened in a moment or over a few days, and something got rewritten. Not covered over, not managed better, actually rewritten. If you can remember one, even one, you have direct personal evidence that this is possible, which is not a small thing, because a lot of people spend years wondering if they're actually capable of change. And the answer, if you've had a moment like that, is yes, you already have. Your brain already knows how to do this. Here's the part that I find most useful about all of this, and it's directly practical for anyone thinking about therapy. A lot of people come to me and ask, which kind of therapy should I do? IFS, EMDR, somatic experiencing, AEDP, coherence therapy, CBT, EFT. There are dozens of modalities. Everyone claims their approach is the one that really works. What memory reconsolidation research reveals is something both humbling and clarifying. Many of these good modalities appear to be mobilizing the same underlying mechanism, whether they know it or not. In 2024, Ecker published two significant papers making this argument formally. One in the Journal of Psychotherapy Integration proposes memory reconsolidation as a unifying account of therapeutic action across modalities. The other is a comprehensive meta review of the 20 plus human behavioral reconsolidation studies since 2010, identifying prediction error as the crucial variable that explains why some replicate and some don't. And here's the practical implication. What matters more than which modality you pick is whether the three requirements, reactivation, mismatch, repetition, actually get met inside it. A skilled AEDP therapist can produce reconsolidation moments. A skilled IFS therapist can as well. A skilled EMDR therapist can. And a skilled somatic practitioner can. What they share is not a brand, it's a mechanism. And conversely, even a technically excellent therapist using the perfect protocol can produce a lot of insight without ever producing an update if the three requirements don't line up. When you're looking for a therapist, the question isn't just what training they have. The question is whether the work they do brings the old thing alive and whether new things get to actually happen in the room. If the sessions feel like an ongoing analysis of your patterns, you may be getting a lot of insight without the mechanism. And that is worth knowing. I also want to be honest about something else here. The basic neuroscience of reconsolidation is strong. That part is not controversial. But the reliable clinical mobilization of it is still being worked out. The field lacks the kind of large-scale randomized trials that would establish specifically MR-informed therapy as first-line evidence-based treatment. What the trained clinicians doing this work report is very promising. The formal evidence base needs to catch up. Both things are true. So here's where we are in the series. Pillar 1, relational safety, the container in which everything else becomes possible. Pillar 2, internal multiplicity, the parts of you that make the stuck patterns coherent and loyal. Pillar 3, somatic awareness, the body as the place where the old learning actually lives. And this week, Pillar 4 is the experiential transformation, the mechanism by which the old learning gets rewritten once you've created the conditions the first three pillars point toward. And here's the thing I hope you're seeing now, looking back at the whole framework. Each pillar is not a separate technique. They're all doing the same thing from different angles. The relationship provides the safety that allows reactivation without being re traumatized. Working with your parts brings the old learning into the room in a way that's precise, not overwhelming. The body gives you the felt sense access and the felt sense mismatch that language alone can't produce. And all of it converges in the moment where the old thing shows up, something contradicts it, and the update lands. What I hope you're taking from this whole series is that change is not a mystery. It's not lucky. It's not something a chosen few get. It has a mechanism, and your brain already has that mechanism running. You've probably already used it more times than you realize. What therapy does when it works is create the conditions where the mechanism can fire on purpose, on the patterns you most want to change. Next week is the finale. I'm going to bring all four pillars together into one integrated framework. We're going to talk about what it looks like in practice, how to think about your own therapy or personal work through this lens, and how to find the help that most likely is to actually produce the kind of change we've been talking about. It's called the MetaTherapy Framework. It's the reason I started this series, and it's what I'll be presenting, hopefully, at the APA convention this year. The question I'd love you to sit with this week is this: what's a moment in my life, big or small, where something actually rewired, and what were the conditions in that moment? If you can find one, even one, you have a personal blueprint for what actually works for you, which is very useful information. One important note before we close: I don't want anyone hearing this and trying to deliberately activate their own traumatic memories to run reconsolidation on themselves. I don't want someone going to AI and having them do this. Please don't. Reactivating trauma without proper support can be re traumatizing and can actually, over the long term, make things much worse. The concepts in this episode are for understanding, not solo practice. The work belongs with a collaboration with trained clinicians. Thanks for joining. My name is Dominic, and this has been MetaTherapy. I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.